Hello friends, I'm so glad you're stopping by today. If you are new here, my name is Laura Ingalls Gunn. I started seriously sewing about 3 years ago, and my main focus was to create historical garments that I could wear when I was volunteering at the Farmers Branch Historical Park here in Dallas, as well as the Little House on the Prairie museum site in Independence, Kansas. And if you are a individual that loves to sew historical fashion, then you well know it is an endless rabbit hole. You may be researching buttons and 20 pages later you're deep into collars. There's just a plethora of information, and I just found this newfound hobby so exciting and interesting. And the more I began to research as well as volunteer at the historical sites, an idea began to formulate in my mind. I would refer to the Little House books written by Laura Ingalls Wilder when I was giving lectures and presentations. And Laura's style of writing was so very vivid and descriptive that I could see the clothing in my mind. And so the idea began to formulate that I wanted to try to create these garments, and I wanted to document the process of how I came to formulate my ideas and what my research had led to. But like many women, I sometimes struggle with self-esteem, and I thought, no, I'm not the right person to do this. I'm not a dress historian. I am not a fashion academic who has a master's or a doctorate degree in textiles. I'm not qualified to do this. And I came across some videos that were so full of encouragement. And the creator of these videos was a lovely woman named Kathy Hay. And Kathy is also a well-known fashion historian and academic, extremely knowledgeable in her field and a true master of her craft. And I just found her to be so encouraging that I revisited the idea that I wanted to write this book. And I began to think, I can do this. Even though I've only been sewing at that point, it was just a few short months, I can get better with each garment that I try to make. And then it kind of came to full fruition when I really thought about the fashions that are portrayed in the Little House books were worn by the everyday person, the pioneers, the settlers, the prairie girls. And I imagine that for many of them, their needle and thread skills were passed down from their mothers and not from anything that they had learned at school. And so when I thought to approach it from this direction, I thought, you know what? I don't know a lot, but I am the perfect person to write this book because I'm excited about it. Well, then it was time to really start researching. And for each book, I went through with fine-tooth comb in selecting various descriptions of clothing that Laura had written about. And one dress that I knew I wanted to make was the Polonaise worn by Nellie Oleson in Little Town in the Prairie. And I will read you the description of what Laura wrote. She wore a fawn-colored dress made with a Polonaise. Deep pleated ruffles were around the bottom of the skirt, around her neck, and falling from the edges of the wide sleeves. At her throat was a full jabot of lace. And, based on the research and the timeline, I knew that Laura was writing about a natural form era gown. And this particular description also has an illustration by the wonderfully talented Garth Williams. And you can see the Polonaise and the full sleeves, and at the bottom you see the pleated ruffle and the full jabot of lace. But up until this time, I had never sewn with silk. So I started with a few other garments first to sew that was using, of course, the famous calicos that Laura so often wrote about. And I just kept building my skill. And I knew Nellie's dress was going to be probably one of the last dresses that I created for the book. And so when I finally got to the point where I said, I think I'm ready to maybe tackle this dress, I knew that I was going to be sewing the dress first completely in a cotton, and it turned out to be fabric that I found at an estate sale, and I think the 8 yards that I needed were $5, and I wrote a post about it on my website, which I will link to down below. So this is a good time to talk about patterns as well as community, because they really went hand in hand. So I have never taken a dressmaking class, and I don't know the art of draping. And yes, you can hear our Grace in the background. She is going after it. Oh, it's a squirrel. Okay, so just ignore that. But anyways, this was a pattern that I found from Butterick, and it had very similar lines to what I was looking for. And with a little bit of research, I found that this dress actually was taken from a Patterns of Time illustration. And I will link to that original resource down below. Now, of course, this pattern would need to be altered because a girl in that era would not be going to school in a long train with the lace and heavy embellishments. And so I opted to just use the bodice pattern from this. And then the skirt pattern was the truly Victorian 221, the 1878 tie-back underskirt. So that somewhat solved the problem of the patterns. This pattern, I believe they have it listed as an advanced pattern. And I would say that that is true. And when I started making my mock-up, there were some areas of the pleating on the Polonaise that were very confusing to me. And I was still so new to sewing that I needed help. And so a few of the Facebook groups that I belong to, I had posted a question, and a dear woman who I had never met before responded and was so gracious to share her photographs, and all online via email. And that was my now dear friend Jeanette, and she also has a wonderful YouTube video channel that I will link down to below. But she was so gracious in sharing what she knew about making the garment, and we really narrowed down the area that I was having trouble with. And through a series of messages, she was able to help me. And that was just such a wonderful thing to me. My background, as I've mentioned before, is in interior design. And in my profession, other designers, they keep their sources a very closely guarded secret. They don't really like to share information. And, you know, I found the costuming community to be a complete 180 from that. Everyone is just so gracious to share their information. And so when Kathy announced the theme for this year's Foundations Revealed costuming challenge, I thought, now is the time. This gave me the encouragement to make Nellie's dress. And one area that differed on the pattern was, of course, the sleeves. And again, this is about community. Because I am not skilled in hand drafting, I have to thank my dear friend D'Artagnan for all of her help in assisting me to create a pattern for my dress. And her knowledge and expertise is just wonderful. And we both are members of the Dallas-Fort Worth Costumers Guild, as well as the Time Travelers Sewing Circle. And although we haven't been able to meet lately, we love Zoom, and she's just been a wonder in answering some questions. And you know, the other area that I struggled with, but was a good learning curve, is, you know, this dress needed a lot of pleated trim. And you know, there is pleating at the sleeves, at the neckline, and of course at the edge of the Polonaise and around the skirt. And so I had never pleated anything before. And another one of my estate sale finds was this Janome ruffler. And I got it for $2, and I quickly learned why it was only $2. It was eating up my precious silk fabric. So in the end, all of the pleating that you see on the dress, I did by hand, because I also, on the Polonaise, I wanted the pleating to go in this direction on this side and this direction on this side. And using a pleating attachment, it only goes in one direction. And are you ready to see my favorite part of this dress? And yes, I will step away from the camera in just a second to give you a close-up. But in altering this pattern, I didn't want the long train of the dress, and so I needed a way to finish the back. And the natural form era was just bows and ribbons and rosettes and anything you could imagine, just pile it on the dress. So I love this little rosette detail on the back, and it makes the dress unique. And that was my own design. And it took me a while to get the 3 rosettes that I needed to. And as I mentioned before, whenever I make a historical garment, I always try to incorporate an antique element. And in this case, it is the lace jabot. And I will do a close-up on this, but for this, you know, there's always in my travels to estate sales and such, you know, you'll find this beautiful antique lace that's only this long, and what do you do with it? So for Nellie Jabot, these are actually 3 different types of lace that I have layered, and I'll do a close-up on it. And you know, the lace itself is very delicate. It's on a netted background, and there are holes on some of the areas of lace, but because it's gathered, you can't see that. So the women of yesteryear that may have previously worn this lace, again, I feel a bit like I'm honoring them to bring it out and share it with the public and creating a new life for this lace. So it was 3 layers of lace that was attached to some antique netting that I created for it. And so I'm just going to step over and grab the camera so I can show you all the details closer up. And we'll have to adjust the skirt just a little bit because it is a bit askew. But of course, in Laura's description, she talked about, you know, even at the base of the skirt, there was a ruffle. So I wanted to do that. And if you've ever pleated, oh boy, did that take a lot of time. And of course, there's the pleating on the Polonaise. And another thing I should mention is I did raise the neckline on the pattern, and that was something I was able to figure out by myself. So although I started with a basic commercial pattern, you know, it was altered to give the look that I wanted. And I just, particularly this top lace is my favorite. It's just so beautiful and delicate, and I think it's, oh, see, there you go. See that? There's a little hole there, But again, because it's gathered, you can't really tell. And so I'm gonna spin the dress form around and re-fluff out the skirt. And of course, when you have proper undergarments, it looks a little different too, but just, I love what I came up with that to finish that off in the little rosettes. And you know, I would just like to thank Kathy for encouraging us to go beyond and stretch ourselves and to keep learning. And this was truly a fun labor of love for me to create Nellie Oleson's Polonaise. And I hope that you enjoyed the process of how I created it. Have a wonderful day.